one of these, okay, in a little bit of detail so that you'll understand more detail, more depth, what we're talking about for these funds. The first is from governments, federal government or state government. The next one is corporate foundations, from corporate foundations. The third one are mega corporate foundations. Now, I made that term up, all right, but hopefully you'll understand as we go into it in just a second what I mean by that, of a mega corporate foundation. The fourth one are community-based foundations. Now, community could be a geographic area, or it could be a particular type of folks that are interested in only one particular subject. So a community, don't think of it as just somewhere local to you and it's purely a geographic area. It could just be a very narrow focus area. So let's look at the government grants. Most often, grants are going to come from the federal government. All right, they're coming from Uncle Sam, monies that are appropriated by Congress to different federal agencies. Sometimes you'll get state or local governments will have some grants, but not nearly what they have from the federal government level. And as a nonprofit, you'll notice that a lot of these state or local grants will go to local units of government. So a city or a township or a parish or a particular or a county might get some grant money to do one or two, three things, whatever it is that they're trying to solve. So that's usually where you will find the state or the local government grant money. You've got to follow all the government laws. If you take the government grant, then you need to be prepared to do the things that the government requires of its applicants. There are governmental laws that will be in place that might not be in place from other funds. For example, do you have an anti-discrimination policy stated in your bylaws? You know, just because you don't practice discrimination is not what they're asking. Do you follow that? Is it put in your bylaws that way? If you are running a facility, does your facility meet with the Americans with Disabilities Act? Do you have places for wheelchair access? Are your bathrooms accessible to somebody who might be in a wheelchair? Things like that. You've got to make sure, if you're going to get the government money, that you are complying with the Americans with Disability Act. I know we've done that before with some clients where they could not, they couldn't receive any grant funds because the doors were not wide enough to allow people with wheelchairs to have access into the doors of their facility, so they were not grant eligible. These are some things you got to think about before you get any government money. Public procurement is another way. You might have a piece of equipment that you're trying to buy for your health clinic, and you've already picked out the type of equipment that you want. But if you're getting it from a government grant, the government may require of you that you put out a request for proposals, or did you get a bid for all of that, and show me that you really got the best use of those monies. So there are strings that go along with any grant, but there are sometimes more strings that go along with government grants than you may or may not want to have to deal with. So you need to think about that. Now, mega corporate foundation grants are groups that are very large, multinational, worldwide foundations. And they could be digging water wells, or putting computers in classrooms, or protecting the rainforest. They are quite literally all over the map. And they have full-time staff of hundreds that work all day long doing the type of things that these foundations are running and doing. They have much more scrutiny, typically, before they give their money out. There's larger amounts of money that they give on average, which is a good thing. But if you're a startup nonprofit, if you haven't been in business that long, maybe you're a smaller community-based organization, it's not real likely that these mega corporate foundations are going to be the place for you to find money, because they have much larger outcomes that they're trying to reach, things that are much bigger, and they're going to want to know, how long have you been in business? Let me see your foundation, your financials. We want to understand your governance. 1,000 different things that they're going to ask. So the Rockefeller Foundation, the Ford Foundation, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. These are really, really huge mega corporate foundations. And so that seems a little bit oxymoronic, I know, but they come from corporate backgrounds that are really huge. A first cousin to the mega corporate foundation are those that are corporate grants, and this is more likely where you will be able to find some funds, particularly if you're a smaller, more local run nonprofit, is that these corporations fund monies from their own foundations that come from their own corporations. What I mean by that is they take some of the profits and some of the proceeds of their corporation and they will put those over into a foundation so that they can go do good things. Typically, not every time, but typically the focus of the foundation or the focus of the grant money is tied directly to what that corporation's business focus is. So they focus in on the type of things that they want to help, that they want to be involved in, that also ties directly to the type of business that they are. Give you an example. Whole Foods funds food banks. Makes sense, right? The Adidas Foundation likes to have sports programs, particularly those with a social purpose. So if you're trying to put together a community-based wellness center and you're trying to alleviate childhood obesity, well, that is a social purpose. And so the Adidas Foundation may be the kind of place where you could get a walking track or lights for your walking track. So it's not just about giving out tennis shoes, but it fits within their corporate footprint. The Merck Foundation sponsors vaccination programs in African countries. Right? You get the point. There are corporate grants that come from those foundations, but you need to be thinking about what kind of products or services they produce, and does that fit up with what my nonprofit's about. Community-based grants. Now, these are typically smaller amounts of money, around $10,000 a piece would be the average. Sometimes they'll get higher than that. It just depends. But I would say that's a typical way. They are very focused on either a specific geographic area or a very narrow outcome. So, for example, the Christopher Reeve Foundation gives grants to people who have paralysis, because that was something, if you remember that part about Christopher Reeve, who was Superman at the time that he got paralyzed. That's what their lone focus is those who are dealing with paralysis. There are plenty of other good things that need to happen in a community, in an area, in your world to make things better, but the Christopher Reeve Foundation is singly focused on this one particular issue. The Endowment for Health is a organization in New Hampshire that gives out grants to different nonprofits for health care, but only in New Hampshire. So if you're from Maine, or you're from Montana, or you are from Nevada, forget it. You can't get the money, all right? This is only going to that in that local community. So those are a place to look for community-based grants, either because the outcome is something that they're looking to help, or it comes from a geographic area. Now, here's a couple of things in mind, and we're going to get to in just a second what we call our 13 questions that you ought to ask before you start a grant. But here's some things to keep in mind. We've got this little joke that says when you've seen one grant application, you've seen one grant application. No two grant applications are the same. Some ask for reams of paper, some do not. Some have all kinds of information that they want to know about the demographics of the area. They want to understand what the median household income is. They want to know a myriad of different boxes that need to be checked. Others won't. So just because you have gone through one grant application, don't expect that the next one is going to be the same. The government grants very often have some forms that are typical that you have to do for every single government grant, but what the other documentation is they need behind that, not necessarily so. There are different times when you can apply. Some grants you can apply for all during the year. Others only have a particular window that you get into or get out of. They say you can only apply between April 1st and May 6th, or whatever the time frame may be, and if you have to wait another year. Sometimes they'll have 2 or 3 times during the year that you can apply. You've just got to go pay attention to some of the details and really understand what they are looking for as far as the times that apply. That's an important one. There are different criteria that each grant will expect. Different ones have it different way, different things that they're looking for. Some of them won't fund an organization unless you have 5 years worth of audited financials that you can give them. That may be a criteria. Dig down into the details and find out, which means pay attention to the guidelines. There will be different guidelines for each grant that they are looking for particular information, particular things. You really got to pay attention to it. I was working with a lady just a couple of weeks ago that went and printed out tons of paperwork, got all the way through the middle of the grant, got all the way down to about halfway through it, and realized because she had not paid attention to the guidelines on the front end, she wasn't even eligible for the grant, and spent who knows how many hours pouring through the thing only to find out she wasn't eligible for it. Deadlines are things that are important to pay attention to. Many grants will tell you what activities they will not fund. So if you're looking for a particular thing, you might want to check that section to make sure that they are not, you're not wasting your time trying to fund something that they're not going to do. So let's look at these 13 questions to ask before you write a grant. Hopefully, these will be some things to help you reflect on it and let you know, man, I'm glad I thought about this stuff, because now I really know what I'm getting into, and I really understand the things that I'm trying to do before I get into the grant writing. First is, do you have the time to invest to do this? Do you really have the time to sit down and pull together all the information that you've got to get that will go into that grant? Once you look at the guidelines, once you understand better about what they're asking for, once you understand that criteria, it takes time to write a grant. You've got to think through the way that you write your narrative. You've got to make sure that you got all the boxes checked. It takes time to do it. And do you have the time to do it? It's something that you really need to ask yourself. The second question is, show who the money. Who is it that wants to know within your organization what this money is going to do? Is it a board of directors? Do you have a finance committee? Is there a particular governmental agency that you report to? Is there some group that wants to know, what are you doing with the money that comes with this? Are there strings attached to these funds? Is there a certain amount of things that we have to stop doing that we are doing now because we got the grant money? So you need to make sure that everybody internally to your organization understands where that money is coming from and what happens with it and what strings might be attached to it. The third thing is, do you have the match? The match means the matching funds. Do you have money that you can put up that matches the grant? Many grants, particularly government grants, are requiring that you have a match. So, if the grant is a 50-50 match, then guess how much money you're putting up? Half of it. If it's a 70-30 match, the government puts up 70, you put up 30. The question is do you have the money? Don't go fill out this application and they are going to ask for proof of funds that you indeed have the money ready to put forward for a $100,000 grant, and the grant may be $100,000, and they're going to give you 70,000 of it, but do you have the other $30,000 in the bank? I mean, yeah, you'd rather only have to give $30,000 for $100,000 worth of project. That certainly is better than 100% of it, but do you even have the $30,000 in the first place? These are things that you need to really make sure of before you get too far into the grant writing process. The fourth thing is, why should I believe you? You are making a statement to me if I am the entity that is giving the grant money out. And part of my background and the time that I spent, which gives me a little bit different perspective than some other folks, is that I actually was the guy that put my signature on a piece of paper that obligated grant money from a federal government agency. And we had to make sure that that the people we were giving this money to really knew what they were talking about. You have to be able to convince somebody of what thing you are trying to fix, because that's really what's happening with a nonprofit, right? You really have found something in your state, in your city, in your community, in your area that you are trying to make better. You are trying to fix something that needs to take place. And in order to do that, you've got to back that up with some data. You've got to back that up with some kind of information that we really, really know that you know what you're talking about. If you say that there are X number of kids in our neighborhood that have chronic health problems, how do I know that? Did you back it up with some facts? Is there some kind of a way? Show me that you really know what you're talking about. Why should I believe you? Doesn't mean that you're lying to me, but I just want to know that you know what you're talking about. Do you have the money for the supporting documents?
Open
What
the
do
light
I
for
mean by
me.
supporting documents in this question number 5? What I mean by that is there may be a feasibility study, or there might be an architectural report or an engineering report that has to go back up the grant I'm trying to get. Do you have the money to pay somebody on the front end to produce those documents for you? This goes back to checking out the details and making sure that you understand what you're getting into before you write this particular grant. But you need to make sure that if you have to have, for example, a phase 1 environmental study because the new community center you're going to build to help kids be able to do an exercise program, do you have the money there to go pay the architect to design the building, or the engineers to understand to make sure the environmental studies have been done on it? Do you have the money for the supporting documents? Question number 5. Number 6 is, can you benchmark? Are you able to track the progress? Do you already have the system set up that you understand? If I said in my grant application that we were going to help 35 kids a month learn to move a grade level up in their reading skills, can you track that? Do you know the answer to that? Do you know how to benchmark that to make sure that that comes together? The 7th thing, number 7, halfway there, okay, of our 13 questions, is do you have the systems and the internal controls in place of actually monitoring how you spent that grant money? You can't come back at a later time and say, oh man, I wish I would have had something other than this shoebox full of receipts to be able to show you how I spent your money. You need to make sure that your accounting is in order. You need to make sure that you have the systems and internal controls so that at a moment's notice, if a knock is on the door and somebody says, I'm here and I want to see your file about how you spent that grant money, you can show them very easily, very quickly, here's how we spent your funds. And you can bet the government's going to want to know that, and other organizations that give you grant funds are going to want to know about that too. Number 8, do you think this money is an entitlement? This is something to think about. I mean, a lot of times we see things on the news and we see things about where grant monies go out, particularly from the government, and we think, good gravy, why in the world are they getting all that money? I could do so much more with that money if I had it. You guys ought to be giving me that money because I could make a much better difference than you're making. That is a mindset of an entitlement, and the government or anybody else or a foundation, they don't have to give you these funds. You need to make sure that you understand you are asking for them, and sometimes, and I've been guilty of this, we want to make sure that we have our attitude in the right way and the right check. That'll bleed through in your application and certainly in your dialogue and communication if you're not paying attention to that. Number 9. Can you convince the guy in the cubicle? This is the guy or the gal that are going to be reading your application. Have you laid out very easily and very well for them without any question that they can follow along and understand what it is you're trying to do, why it is you're going to do it, how are you going to fix it, when are you going to fix it, how much money does it cost, what does my money do that helps you reach this goal? Can you convince me, not because you give a great presentation, but because you wrote it in the right way, that you have a very clearly defined, laid out grant application, because that's who you're going to have to convince. There's going to be some human somewhere that is going to look for the first time at your application to decide, should we even go forward with this thing or not? Number 10, can you follow instructions? Now, this sounds like something that you're trying to learn in kindergarten, and I'm not trying to be silly. I'm trying to help you understand there are a bunch of boxes that are going to have to get checked. There are a bunch of different things that each grant application is looking for, and they didn't put those instructions in there just because it was fun to do one Thursday afternoon. They have a reason that they have put those instructions in there for supporting documents or backup or whatever it is that you got to provide. Check, double check, and triple check before you send your application in. Have you followed the instructions very carefully? Sounds like a silly thing to say, but I can't tell you the number of grants that we've gotten a hold of that people have tried to write, They didn't get the money. We went back and did the review on it, and guess what? They didn't follow the instructions right. They didn't understand what the grant entity was asking for, and so they got their grant kicked out. You don't want that to happen. Do you shoot the messenger? Now, this is in particular case, again, back with some of these government grants, but many times a government entity that is a government organization that is giving out grant money, they have their hands tied by Congress on the things they have to ask for in that grant application. There could be auditors that come in from one of these mega corporate foundations, and they have said, we suggest that you do not give out any more grant money with some other groups if they don't have ABC, XYZ things in their bylaws. And you may say, man, that's stupid. Why should I have to do that? That doesn't make good sense. Hey, don't shoot the messenger. Don't shoot the lady that's on the other end of the phone with you trying to help you get this grant. If they got to have it, they got to have it. You may think it's stupid. You may think it's silly. Keep that to yourself, okay? Get them the information that they need. Don't go shooting the messenger. Number 12, are you going to be able to keep in operation without the grant? Many times what you're trying to do with these grant funds are to expand or to do things easier or make things better in your current organization. But if you need these grant monies to keep your doors open, it's not very likely that you are a candidate that endears yourself to this granting entity. Meaning, why would I want to go give you this money if the whole thing could be shut down in a year? I want to know that my money expands and makes your organization stronger and continues to make things do better, that you've got a long history, that you're going to be able to do well. Those are the type of things that a granting entity is going to want to know. If this is your last bit of gasp for air money, it could be pretty difficult for you to get the funds. You need to make sure that you can keep in operation, that you will keep your doors open if you don't get this grant. And the last one is, it kind of goes to the first one, is do you have patience? It takes time, and it takes energy and effort to go through all this, and you just may not have the patience to go through it. You may throw your hands up half the way through it and say, man, I am so tired of trying to do this. I wish this thing would end. Well, sometimes that happens whenever you start doing grant work. So think about that beforehand, is do you really have the patience and the time to go through it, to do your grant application? So, hey, we're ready to get started for you. If you know that doing a grant application is something that you would like to do, you're not sure where the different grants are out there, you're trying to figure out, do I have time to write this grant myself? You know, Nick, I just went through these 13 questions and I realized I don't have the time and I don't have the patience and I don't have the energy or the effort to go through to write this grant. We'd rather have somebody like you guys write it. And it may be very well that we could do that. So we would hope that you'd take some time and let's schedule a time for you and I to get on the phone. And it's a free assessment. It's a free time.